It's September. The leaves haven't quite started falling yet, but we're basically in the fall months. So this is the time of the year. We're getting close to Halloween. Horror movies, there's so many of them come out this time of year. We've already had a couple come out this year, and this week the Nun II came out. It's playing now in theaters, and then A Haunting in Venice comes out next week. So Roland, you are the horror aficionado on this channel. I just wanted to ask you, do you have like a list of movies that you're anticipating? Can you help guide us through what's worth watching and what's not worth checking out?
Yeah, I do actually. I got it on this piece of paper.
Nice, that's a big list. Okay.
How do you want me to do this? I'll just go down. And
you can, yeah. Let's just go through the list. Like we can do a tier list style. We can, you can just give us your advice on each movie. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Start off. The Nun II. No, can't stand that. I can't stand those movies.
I call the first Nun hot garbage because I was like either laughing or commenting sarcastically throughout my time watching it.
Yeah, it's an insanely overrated franchise that hyper heroizes the true events when it wasn't, and you can do your own research on that or whatever. Haunting in Venice. It's got my boy Hercule Poirot. I do like those movies. I think they're really fun.
Yeah. I'm actually really surprised that Agatha Christie wrote a book that sort of like lends itself to a horror franchise.
Yeah.
Like it's because like all the other ones are like murder mystery. There's still a murder mystery apparently in this movie, but it's like a horror movie too. So I'm very interested in seeing how that plays out. And Kenneth Branagh is like perfect in that role.
Yeah, it's a supernatural murder mystery kind of going on. And of course, it's got a big cast.
Tina Fey, Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
I think what's his name? The 50 Shades guy, Jamie Dornan.
Oh, Jamie Dornan. Yeah, he's in that. Kelly Riley from Yellowstone, she's in it. Tina Fey, how could we forget her?
Yep.
Plays like an old friend of Poirot. But yeah, I'm excited. I like those movies, and it will be interesting, like you're saying, to see that twist on a very like real franchise.
Horror. Yeah,
so we'll see.
yeah.
See.
Yep.
Another movie that I don't think it's going to get into a lot of theaters, but it's definitely worth mentioning, is a movie called Satanic Hispanics, which is a horror anthology. And horror anthology is going to be a theme for like most of the movies coming out for the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a bunch of famous Latin directors, the Blair Witch Project, Juan of the Dead. There's like 3 other that I can't think of, but it seems I'm going to watch it. I'm going to be honest. Do you like anthology movies?
I like it. I do. I like anthology movies because it's kind of like a TV show, right? Like you have the same set of characters on different adventures, and they, there's could be connections between them, or there could be no connection between them. But I think anthology movies for me it's sort of like watching a mini series. It's kind of like watching a Twilight Zone, except each episode is a movie.
Yeah,
I love the idea of that. So yeah, absolutely, I would love to check it out.
Yeah, anthologies, they're like little episodics and a giant episode.
Right.
I find anthologies are a hit or a miss because you can find some really good ones, or it's like almost they all like end at like way too early or like not enough.
Yeah, but the upside of that is that if you make a mistake, like if you really put out a complete bomb and like it's a terrible film, the next movie doesn't have to have any of that baggage. It's almost like all of those Batman animated DC movies, like there were like in one movie he might be fighting a zombie, and like in one Batman is in Russia, and like Superman is evil, or like all of those like Elseworld like stories that the animated DC movies do. I'm like, if DC, like, this is kind of a sidebar, but like if DC kind of took that kind of an anthology approach to the live action one, can you imagine the amount of creativity? Like we could get like a Guillermo del Toro directed Batman horror movie. But that's to say, like, I think, I mean, as a concept, anthology horror movies, I think, are fantastic. But that approach you could utilize that in other genres too.
I think DC. This is definitely, we're getting into a sidebar, but I think DC is already sporadic as it is, and to include like 5 stories in one movie is going to confuse the life out of the audience, and I just don't think they're there yet to be able to be comfortable with that. I don't even think Marvel could do it, in all honesty. They might be able to get away with it by trying to say like it's a multiverse thing, but then you're taking away from an anthology. You're purposely connecting it rather than just letting, these stories kind of happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I figured it was more maybe like you make one movie about a very particular kind of story, and then the next movie you make with that same character as a completely different story. Like, it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be all in the same movie, but like, yeah, like if you do a series of films, each movie is sort of same core character in a completely different kind of environment and adventure. Um, but I can kind of, I mean, you don't have to recast the character. It's kind of like if you go to watch a James Bond movie, but if you just watch the first movie with each new actor. Um, in this case, you'll be recast. Like you watch the first Sean Connery movie, the first Roger Moore movie, then you go watch the Timothy Dalton Bond, the Pierce Brosnan, and then you
Yeah.
get to Daniel Craig. So yeah, but as a fan of psychological horror, I think some of the better horror genre movies and shows out there, I think, are like Black Mirror is one, the Twilight Zone I mentioned.
Yeah.
I try to find those as much as possible. So yeah, I would love to check out more anthology stuff because you can kind of also the entry point could be any single one. You can start
Yeah.
at the beginning, you can start at the end, you can watch them in any order you want. So I think that's something people sort of are longing for, living in a world where everything is a franchise and you have to kind of watch everything before you watch the latest one to kind of know what's going on. I think anthology movies kind of give you a freedom from that. It's so
Yeah.
the episodic style.
Another franchise that deals with anthology movies is VHS. The
Right.
VHS 85 that's going to be dropping on Shudder. But those kind of movies, like, you really don't need to know the previous one. You just kind of are
Mm-hmm.
thrown into this world and you're like, oh, wow, those are really cool graphics. Oh, wow, I am terrified. Those are scary movies, dude. I love horror. Those scare me. I don't think I'm going to be totally honest. I have nothing to prove. They do their job well, and that'll
Yeah.
be definitely an interesting watch. This
Yeah.
is going to be the third anthology in the series where it's like back in time, kind of like they did VHS 84 and
Mhm.
VHS 99. So
Okay.
yeah,
So the number is like the year in which the movie takes place.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
new one is 85.
yeah. Yes, 85.
So it's like a year after the first one, technically.
When was the first? I don't.
Did you say
I don't.
it was VHS 82 or 84?
Oh no! So this is VHS 85, like
Right.
last review 85, and the other ones. I mean, there's VHS 1 and VHS 2 and 3, but the other ones are 94 and 99.
Oh, 94. I thought you said 84. Okay, so this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
like
yeah. No, it was
going
all
to
right.
the
Yeah,
80s. Yeah, I do love watching horror movies that are sort of like period pieces because
yeah. They can be
because
fun.
like you can I mean but because the thing is some horror movies they just use it as like a excuse to dress up the film in a different aesthetic, but then
Yeah,
some movies really like dive into the era and take advantage of like all the intricacies, all the unique characteristics of living in that time and how that adds to the movie itself. I think The Nun is an example of where they just use it for aesthetic like set dressing and but the
yeah,
story is very generic. But there's other examples of franchises where they've really used it to their advantage. Like I think X was a big cult hit, and that was a movie that where it takes place in a completely different time, and they really like went for like the authenticity of it all while making it a unique horror film that people liked. And I think yeah, it was like a surprise hit. And the sequel
yeah.
and everything that's coming, prequel, all that.
Yeah. Pearl was good. I argue that it's not as good as X, but I'm very excited to see Maxine. That's I think that's coming out early 24. So that'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
what are there any other movies like? Are you excited about Saw X at all?
Saw is a franchise I never got with. I think the first one is fantastic. And then everything else is just gore for the sake of gore.
Yeah. Wasn't the last one the one that Chris Rock was in?
Spiral.
I saw that one and
Yeah.
it was okay, but then the third act was very cliche gore, and it was just like, yeah, it had me for a while, but then it just kind of devolves into just like, all the cliches of genre of Saw. It's kind of its own genre within the genre, so it's just like, yeah, I don't think it was the best movie, but apparently it was better than a lot of the other recent ones. So I don't know, which I haven't
Yeah.
seen a lot of them because I don't like gore for the sake of gore. I'm like, there has
Yeah.
to be a story behind it, like like this is to be
Exactly.
character motivated and all that. What about like there isn't there like a Five Nights at Freddy's? Yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's. Is that something that you?
Dang, you ruined my good segue.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
we'll do Five Nights at Freddy. No, it's fine. I had something planned, Dan, and you want to do your
Oh,
own thing. That's okay.
uh,
Uh, Five Nights at Freddy. Yeah, I never played the video games. I like Josh Hutcherson though, so that will be interesting, and we'll see how it works with live action. Bringing video games and adapting them has definitely been a hit or a miss the past few years, or really just the
Re
entirety.
Resident Evil is probably another one that it's like every
Yeah,
time they come out with a new. At this point, I think people have just given up on it. So
yeah, yeah. Like at first, it was
yeah,
really cool, and then it was just like, what are we doing here? You know.
right,
The Last of Us, I think that was a great one to show like it can be done. But
yeah,
with Five Nights at Freddy's, I think we're going to find that what made it scary was that you were in the game, you were controlling. So what your
right.
actions were actually what made it scary. So we'll see. I mean, it's still creepy animatronics. So it's
There's a certain tangibility to animatronic effects that you just don't get from CGI, even like today, because
yeah,
it's despite how good CGI is, there's also like if you know it's animatronic, it kind of has a creepy like vibe to it all unto itself.
yeah,
So I feel like the best animatronic work is the one that's not meant to hide that it's animatronic. Like is like you watch the original Jurassic Park, and the shots where you know it's an animatronic are sometimes like dinosaurs are creepier than the ones where you don't. And then some of the most iconic moments of animatronic visual effects in horror movies are like the ones where it's just like, oh yeah, this looks just freaky because it doesn't look quite real, but it's close enough, and it's just that
yeah.
uncanny valley of horror where you're just freaked out by just your sense of fear of the unknown while seeing what you're seeing, the visceral nature of the effect on screen.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Willy's Wonderland did phenomenal. So I do have high hopes for Five Nights at Freddy. I think it'll do good. I might watch it. We'll see. One movie that I will not be watching is Thanksgiving. This is a movie by Eli Roth.
Oh,
And if you don't know, he did Hostel. He did a movie called Clown. Um, he is one of those filmmakers that you can have a lovely conversation with. And if you go through the history, even had like a history of horror thing that was really amazing. But you don't want to watch his work because it's gory to be gore. And he always takes it a little too far in the darkness, in my opinion. Um, but if you want to see blood and guts and go nuts, then I think Thanksgiving will be a lot of fun for those kind of viewers.
yeah. Yeah. It's counter programming in a way, right? Like it's gonna be coming out at a time when people, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's fans of horror who will just go watch any horror movie, and if regardless of whether it's about Christmas or Thanksgiving, and every year we kind of see one of these movies that kind of takes advantage of some kind of date on the calendar, and they're
Yeah.
like, what if we made a horror movie about it? So yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Thanksgiving is one of those holidays where it's underappreciated in music and film. So why not make a slasher out of it? Hulu
why
tried
not?
to do it, I think like 5 years ago or something, and that was all right. So you know,
Yeah, there's not. I don't usually find many Thanksgiving related horror movies out there. That's definitely not a.
yeah,
Yeah. You know what I am wondering though? Okay, sidebar again. Friday the 13th in October this year. Why didn't they just make an? You would think some studio executive somewhere was like, we should make another Friday the 13th movie because this year the dates line up.
yeah.
I wonder why that didn't happen.
I don't know. Those kind of slashers, they're really, I don't know, because Michael Myers, made its comeback. We had the new Halloween trilogy, which was really fun and great, especially for people who like kind of campy 80s horror films. Like
Yeah.
it was a really good time. So you think that they would take advantage of it. I mean, we haven't seen a Nightmare on Elm Street movie since the 2010 reboot. There hasn't been any except for like fan films.
Right.
And then, Friday the 13th, you're right. It's exactly the same. Um, I don't know. It's a good
Yeah.
question. Lots to
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah. The Exorcist Believer, of course, was gonna be like holding the fort down for the
Yeah.
genre until Taylor Swift decided to change the plan. But yeah, I was just wondering, like, it's just because it doesn't happen much on the calendar. It's just the dates lining up that perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
So,
why I was like, come on, let's get it's a reboot. I really want a Creatures from the Black Lagoon.
oh,
There's never been a reboot. I mean, we have the Shapes of Water, but that's just
right.
because Guillermo del Toro was like, fun fact, they actually had a reboot script and he was going to direct it in the 90s after the success of The Mummy. But like they had like a clashing with Universal. But there's
Oh,
been a script for the Creatures from the Black Lagoon every decade, and there's not been one. There's not been a movie since 1956. It's ridiculous. I want the Gill Man on screen.
yeah, it's just there's some movies that, oh, not movies, but like scripts and franchises or to be franchises that go through development hell for decades before they come to screen. And like there's other examples of it out there. I think like for example that John Carter movie that completely flopped at the time.
Yeah,
That one I think went through development hell for like 20 years. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week where I think Neil deGrasse Tyson does the Star Talk podcast. He was interviewing one of the authors of the biography of Robert Oppenheimer that Oppenheimer, the movie from Christopher Nolan, is based on.
yeah,
And they talked about the fact that there was a producer who had, or not a producer, but he was in some part of academia somewhere, and he had bought the film rights to the book decades ago, and then he could just never get anybody to bite on the book. Um, and it wasn't until like a few years ago that during the pandemic, he just flew out to Hollywood and to talk to one producer buddy that he knew who happened to work for Christopher Nolan. And then, through that, they passed the book on to Nolan, and Nolan then just decided he read the book, decided to write the movie, and then just called the author after he wrote the movie and said, "Hey, look, I wrote the script. I'm gonna make the movie. I'd love to run the script by you guys and make sure it's all accurate and everything." So there's examples like it out there. I think James Cameron says multiple times that the first time he had the idea for Avatar was, I think, when he was working on The Abyss, or like what was it, The Abyss, the one with like their underwater yeah. It was decades before he thought there was technology was good enough for him to actually make it. Although yeah, but definitely there's examples of it out there. I'm sure
yeah,
that's happened to big franchise like movies that they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on. I can only imagine how many like other movies that are like horror movies or movies that don't nearly need a huge budget, how they kind of go through it. And today's box office is so what would you call it? Like it's so stratified, or maybe that's not the right word, but like you either need to make a movie that's going to make $1 billion to be successful, or
yeah,
you make a movie that's so low budget that it really doesn't need to make even $100 million to be successful. I think the mid-budget movies have suffered the most in like the blockbuster era that we're living in, and so many horror
yeah,
movies like kind of were in that like middle area where you spend like maybe 30 to $50 million, and if you made a couple of hundred million, that's all you need. But the studios just don't make a lot of those movies, or when they do, like you might find it on Shutter. It goes to
yeah.
streaming. So yeah.
No, it's a really good point. But I just want to mention one last movie so we can end our horror for the rest of the year for 2023. We have a movie called Totally Killer, which is like there's a slasher, and then Kiernan Shipka, who you might know from Sabrina the Teenage Witch or
Oh,
even
okay.
Mad Men.
Yep.
She stars in, and she like goes back in time to the 80s when like there was an original like slashing and all of that. This
Oh,
is going to be
okay.
produced by Blumhouse. Very excited for this movie because I think it's going to be uh, my best friend's exorcism, what they were trying to do, but actually succeeding, like in
Oh,
making this
okay.
fun and making this like
Yeah.
killer and all this fun. I have high hopes for this. I hope I'm
That,
not disappointed.
well, Blumhouse is like it's like they hit or miss. Like it's not everything that they put out is good. But like actually, so who's involved? Is there like a big name director behind this, or is this just indie?
Totally Killer is it's directed by somebody that I've never. Oh, she directed Always Be My Maybe, which is
Oh,
kind of crazy. But Randall
yeah.
Park, he is in the movie,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
she's worked with him on Fresh Off the Boat. The director's name is Nanakshka Khan.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and she seems to be kind of more of a TV director. But I
Yeah.
mean, most great direct like Edgar Wright started in TV directing, so
Yeah. Yep.
I think this will be really fun and cool. So
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, you got to start somewhere, and yeah, it doesn't matter where you come from. I think cutting your teeth on movies like this also it's a fantastic way to kind of get your name. No, there's so many directors who came out of nothing. Like James Wan has a story. Like he started like with making low mid budget horror movies, and where I mean, he still kind of lives in that genre, but like he's got the Aquaman franchise. He got a second movie coming out. The first one made $1 billion, and now he's got to deal with to go work with Blumhouse over at Universal. I mean, so. Meanwhile, like the director who made the Nun II, he sort of like worked his way up into New Line's stable of horror directors. So there's a lot of fantastic stories out there. There's so
yeah,
many people who have come up to New Line cinema and their horror genre. Like Walter Hamada before he was in charge of DC and like he left earlier last year. But he came up to New Line Cinema, and because of his success making profitable horror movies, where they spent not a lot of money but made a shit ton at the box office, that was the reason why they hired him to work on DC. So like, and now I think he got hired either over at Universal or Paramount. So like, there's such a there's a lot of great stories in Hollywood and success stories of people who worked their way up to the horror genre, and whether they continue to be in the same genre later in their careers or moved on to other bigger, greater things like
yeah,
Guillermo del Toro. Like, and he's made so many movies across the board. Like Pacific Rim is probably one of his best movies, and it's not even a horror movie.
yeah.
So yeah. What do you, before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about, have you seen the trailer for Godzilla Minus Zero or
Oh,
Minus One? Godzilla Minus One.
yeah.
Yeah.
I did actually, and I thought it was all right. In all honesty, I'm more excited for the Monarch
The
with
Monarch.
Kurt
Yeah.
Russell.
I
Um,
mean, the Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One looked way more savage though, right? Like it was like that Godzilla was wrecking house, like in a way that I don't think we really, because they
yeah,
really made like the Godzilla in the what is who makes all the Warner Brothers version of this franchise, the Monsters universe, I think they call it.
yeah.
They really made this Godzilla sort of like an anti-hero. Whereas like it seems like every time like a Japanese Godzilla movie comes out, like Godzilla is like a straight up like bad dude who's does
Well,
nothing but destroy.
that's the thing about Godzilla movies. I love Godzilla movies. My favorite Godzilla movies are the Japanese ones from the 90s because
Right.
they're insanely hilarious. Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, a classic, dude. I love those movies. But you'll see if you actually look at the long line of Godzilla movies, is that there will be phases where he's a straight villain.
Mm-hmm.
He's a straight anti-hero. He is a villain, anti-hero, villain, anti-hero, and it's just all depends on who is there. You know, if it's just Godzilla, and then he has no kind of like excuse of being like, oh well, he was fighting a monster. It's just he's destroying a city because that's what Godzilla does.
Yeah.
He's always a villain. We just always kind of paint him as like, oh, he's an anti-hero because he's fighting this bigger bad. No, he likes destroying stuff. All right.
Right. Yeah, it's just the lesser of two evils. It's sort of like he's the Tyrannosaurus Rex of the Jurassic World franchise,
I mean,
where like he will try to kill you in a Jeep, but then when some genetically modified whale comes around, or like alligator, whatever
Yeah.
is the flavor of the month, he will come and fight that for you just
I
to let
never
you
thought about that.
escape,
That's actually a really good
right?
analogy.
It's
Yeah.
like, because like they've used that like trope so many times at this point. Like every new Jurassic World
Yeah.
movie, for some reason, at the end, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is like the big gun that comes and helps the humans get away while he fights off like some monstrosity that they came up with for that film. But yeah, no, I agree. I think, but if you're looking for flavors of Godzilla, Godzilla -1 will be coming out in December, and then the Monarch show is going to be running at the same time. It's going to start airing a couple of weeks before, and then it's going to keep airing for a few weeks after, weekly, I think, on Apple TV Plus. So I am so excited because if you're a fan of Godzilla, you'll have your fill of, I think, two different flavors. But the trailer looks fantastic. There's definitely in the 90s, like the effects, like you had to really suspend your disbelief to kind of believe like what you were watching had any sense of reality to it.
Yeah.
But I feel like that Godzilla -1 movie looks as good as any Hollywood version of Godzilla that we have seen, like it's from a visual effects standpoint. And then even like there was another Godzilla movie that came out a couple of years ago. I think even that was pretty good. So, and that like a Japanese Godzilla film.
You're talking about Shin Godzilla?
Shin Godzilla, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is
right?
really. I'm not going to get into it. But recommend.
But yeah, anyhow, but also like a couple of weeks ago, we got news that when Warner Brothers delayed Dune Part 2, they also delayed Godzilla times Kong. What is it? Like there's a whole title after that. The next Godzilla and Kong movie got delayed. I think got pushed from like early spring to like later in the year. So we are going to get another Godzilla movie next year. We're getting a Godzilla movie this year, and we're getting a Godzilla show. I think it's kind of like Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. Like they're like horror movies in a way, but they're not entirely horror movies. But definitely like there's jump scares and like there's like building up the dread. So
they're creature features.
There's creature feature. Right. There you go. It's like would you call that a subgenre of horror or is it an entirely separate thing?
Yes, actually I do. Because it's kind of like one of those things where it's dealing with horror-esque imagery and characters and types, but it's not necessarily there to scare you or scare you throughout.
Right.
So, but yeah, I love creature features.
Yeah, absolutely. I think creature there's good ones, there's bad ones. You kind of have to be careful about the ones you go to watch. Also, like depending on which director has a different take. Like there's been multiple attempts at doing a Swamp Thing, and to varying degrees of quality. But anywho, like horror movies, there's a lot of them coming out this year. Roland, you gave us some really good recommendations. You also kind of advised us to stay away from a couple of them. I'm excited to see how all of them do. My personal favorite one that I'm looking forward to is going to be A Haunting in Venice, because I just love that Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, that whole franchise is one of my favorites going on today. So let us know, guys, in the comments below, which ones are you looking forward to? Have you gone to see The Nun 2? Are you going to go to see A Haunting in Venice? Are you looking forward to all the other horror movies that are going to be coming out? Five Nights at Freddy's. There's so many other ones. Are you going to check out Thanksgiving? Is that something that interests you? Let us know in the comments. Of course, like and subscribe for more.